So without further ado, I do want to welcome Shari. And Shari, I want to say thank you for joining us today. You are someone who I've really enjoyed speaking to over the many years at CIO meetings and at conferences. And because we have such an active CIO group and CIO list, we've been on committees and we've had opportunity to interact with each other through emails and what have you. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you will introduce yourself, talk about your role, your institution, and anything else you'd like to say to get us started today. And again, welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Gayleen. This is great. I really like what you're doing here, and it was a lot of fun at Can Height, and I've seen a couple of the sessions of the other CIOs, and such wonderful opportunities to get to know these amazing women more broadly and more deeply. So that's been great. I do want to apologize in advance because we are having all of our orientation activities happening, and my office is kind of right by the main the main entryway. So there's lots of noise, which is great. The students are having lots of fun, and so it's great. So if you hear noise happening, that's what's going on.
It's in the spirit, Shari. So it's all good. And I'm in the same boat because my window faces the green, and there was chanting earlier. I had to close my window during a meeting. So it's all good. Yay! It's finally happening.
I know, this is great. This is great. Except the traffic wasn't really great coming in this morning, but other than that, it's been good. So yeah, I'm Shari Baraniuk. I'm the CIO and Associate Vice President of Information and Communications Technology at the University of Saskatchewan. The University of Saskatchewan is in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and our campus is approximately 26,000 students, about 5,000 faculty and staff. We are a research-intensive university. We have lots of infrastructure here with us. We have the Canadian Light Source. We have the VIDO Intervax, which is our vaccination infectious disease organization that's doing a massive expansion for vaccine development. And that we have the Fedoric Center, which is a nuclear, I know we've talked about this, that all the campuses that have nuclear on their campuses. And so lots of breadth and depth of stuff that IT interacts with, and we support the IT organization. We've got about 220 staff in our IT organization, and we're pretty centralized. We're probably about that 85–90% of IT on campus is centralized into the ICT organization. So yeah, so that sort of gives a snapshot of me and our organization.
Wow, that's a lot. And wow, that's great. Really interesting things to pick into there for sure, with respect to your institution and the way your IT environment is set up there. So that's always fascinating when we have those overviews from other campuses and we can see ourselves in it. And yes, you're right about the nuclear piece. I like to use that as my big mic drop moment. And people have heard me say that anecdotally before too. It's fun, but then it's kind of serious. So we try not to overuse that one for sure. So I know that you, when we were talking, you have been a CIO now for 7 years, and I thought it'd be really interesting for people to hear about your path into becoming a CIO within a higher ed institution. And one of the things that you and I've talked about before is just the value of showing people there are many different paths to becoming someone in tech, someone leading technology organizations within institutions, higher ed institutions, and elsewhere, of course. So please tell us your story, Shari, because I think it's really quite interesting.
I was trying to figure out how much of a story to tell here, and I thought I'd start back. So I won't tell my age or anything, but you might glean that from some of the.
I'm 55 on Friday, just saying that right there. So you're free, but don't feel like you have to.
So my undergrad was in management, so it was operations research, so it was a commerce degree, and that was back when sort of computers were just starting to come out and not really understanding what it is. But from an operations research perspective, and this has always been my passion, is sort of process improvement, efficiencies, workflow, getting things kind of moving together and stuff. And so obviously computers sort of helped and started in that realm as well. So got headhunted from a computer consulting firm. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And so that's how I sort of got started into IT. So right out of undergrad, started in computer consulting, did a few really technical projects. So I sort of got my teeth into some of the, and you know, the COBOL. I think it was Jody that said she was also a COBOL programmer. That was me too. So doing some of that stuff, sort of went on projects all around the world, came back to Canada, just to sort of start settling down and making my career a little bit more focused. Started working with a large transportation, CP Rail, and focused in on business analysis for them. So, but with their new scheduling system. So always in the systems, had that little dabble of technology, but really trying to focus a lot on that business side. So the business analysis, the quality assurance, the process improvement. So not a technical sort of lead into my career. We moved to Saskatoon in 1996, and so that's kind of when I started with the university. It's one of the larger employers in Saskatoon, and really got my love of higher education at that time, like just the vibrancy, the challenges. There's never a dull moment, right? In higher ed, we do so much for so many things, as I mentioned, in the research infrastructure, but we have retail operations, you know, we have you know, all the creativity, so almost like a R&D kind of thing, and so we do so many different things. At the time when I started with the university, we were very decentralized in our IT, so even all of our admin IT was all decentralized units. So started as in the facilities area, so working in facilities and really trying to get my head wrapped around what they were trying to achieve and what they were trying to do, and was implementing a new system for them at that time. I was only there for about a year and a half, and then moved into the finance area. So again, looking at finance for the institution, procurement, all that area. So was there for quite a while. And then at about 2014, we started to centralize. And so we, most of the admin units came together into ICT. So I became the director of client services. And that was where I started really building the relationships, going out, talking to people, just trying to get an understanding of what things were, sort of coming from a decentralized group, coming into the central. You know, there was a lot of things I didn't like as a decentralized group that's central. So I was thinking about how do I influence and shift sort of the conversations and discussions. And I think in that 1 year, because after a year was when I got tapped on the shoulder to become the CIO. And it was the provost that kind of reached out to me. I was in the Czech Republic at the time, playing hockey with, my son was playing hockey over there. So it was kind of a wake-up call there for that, because it hadn't even been on my radar, and I was thinking I was going to be in this other position for a while. And I think a lot of the things that they mentioned, the reason why they tapped me on the shoulder for it was really that the way I talked about IT, they were saying that they could finally understand what IT was and what the value of it could bring to the business. It was the relationships I had built and the influence. And so really not looking from a technical perspective at all. They were really looking for somebody who could build those relationships and move things around. So yeah, I started in this position, and I guess they've thought that what I've been doing hasn't been too bad, because I've now been in this role for about 7 years. So
yeah, that's it is really fascinating. And so you did actually have some more technical activities that you undertook. And I'm curious, when you moved in 1996 to Saskatoon, was there a particular position that you thought, oh yeah, I could do that you pursued? I mean, did you even understand how universities worked from an employee? I know, that's how I feel too. It was like, I remember mine was, there was sort of a double title. It was client services within computing and communication services at the University of Guelph. And I was like, I don't even, is it client services or is it community? You know, you just don't know how it's all set up. But what about for you? What was the draw?
Well, it was so funny because I applied, so there was a position and it was called a systems analyst. And I thought, okay, this must be similar to a business analyst, you know, and stuff. So I don't know how many other universities and use that term of systems analyst.
A lot, yeah.
But I thought it was going to be more on the business side, but it ended up being a very technical, you know, kind of focus. And so, yeah, I wasn't really keen on that. But but the people who interviewed me were like, oh, she'd be great in this project manager. So they hired me in a term as a project manager to help with some of the projects moving forward. But yeah, it was not understanding, you know, what that organization looked like, or some of the terminology they were using. So
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And would you say, so again, just trying to think about who might see this video in time, and you know, people have talked to me about really changing their thinking about what it means to jump into organizations like ours, and what their competency set are and how they would look at the opportunities. But just that idea of can do. So, you know, you didn't really understand it, but you sort of thought, I can do that. And I think that's been a bit of a theme that I've heard from all of our peers and other individuals that I've interacted with. Specifically, I would say from a female or women peers, to say, I didn't really know what I was going to get into, but I decided that I was going to step into the opportunity and be courageous. I don't know that we used to use that language. It was like, I don't know, I need a job. I'm going to figure something out. You know, I've got some skills. I think I can do this. But what do you think about that idea? Because it is true in trying to get people just to think less about what all the things you know already, but what great opportunities there are out there for us to just try.
And I think that is key, because, you know, and I don't know if it's a, you know, a women men thing, or if it's personality. Like people don't realize this, but whenever I do any of those testing things, I'm an extreme introvert. But my ways of dealing with that was to just put myself out there and just do things I knew I was going to be uncomfortable no matter what I did. So I might as well just put myself out there. You know, even growing up high school, I became the class president. You know, fear everywhere, but I just thought, no, I got to do this. I got to push forward with this. So I think that was you know, some of the things, and, you know, if it's putting yourself out there, but also really reaching and trying to leverage other people. So even when I started at the university and went into that facilities position, I started going out and talking to people. I would just, you know, have meetings with people across that I thought that I should connect with. And it was so funny that everybody was like, when I first came into their offices, they were like, so why are we meeting?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, I just want to see what you're doing and tell you what we're trying to do and all this kind of stuff. And I think they thought I was a little bit crazy at the time. But it's putting yourself out there and looking for those connections, looking for the ways that we can either collaborate or learn or do things. We were all USask. That's what I thought, right? You know, we're all USask. We can just do these things together. And it's hard in higher ed. We're not quite that culture, but I think we're getting better. I think we've been getting better over this past, especially over this past couple of years. I think people have really pulled together a lot more, and they see the value of doing things more collaboratively as well. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think that's really great. And it is quite interesting to think about that culture piece, because yeah, showing up at people's door, especially when you're from, you know, we'll just use the blanket, the IT environment on campus. A lot of people think, well, I don't know, what do I need to talk to you about in any case? But yeah, so it is really changing. So there's two things I wanted to ask you. I mean, you came in really not pursuing the role of CIO, and now you've been permanently doing this for years. How has it been? What did you discover maybe about yourself, or being a CIO, or leading an IT organization? Any words of wisdom that you want to share with us?
Yeah, and I think when I first came in, like there was, they talk about that imposter syndrome, right? That you think, oh, am I supposed to be, like, am I really good for this? Am I, and even those first CUCIO meetings, like, I was very quiet in those meetings. I'm like, am I meant to be here? All that kind of stuff. But I think as things progressed, and I think it was just, again, that style of just reaching out to people and bringing people together and having those conversations, I started to see some shifts, and I started to see how that maybe what my strengths and what I can bring to the table will actually work here. And then understanding where I have the weaknesses, not being real technical, not being, overly sort of more of a extrovert or out there with people, and bringing other people in that can kind of augment that. And so started to build up a little bit of confidence, really trying to push. And so started really focusing a lot on again, where did I see some of the things that I could help sort of move the organization forward while I'm in this position? And so I started to focus a lot on sort of culture and how we did things versus the what we do. And so, you know, we built our technology plan similar to what you did in McMaster behind you there and stuff, and looking at ways and starting to have those conversations of how technology supports the business and the mission of the university, instead of just focusing on the technology as we've done in the past. And that might seem easy for some people that might not have gone through that journey, but it was very, it took a lot. Like it's been a journey for, I think it took us almost 3 years to develop our technology plan. And a lot of it, there was stretching of people and trying to get them to be from an internal perspective, instead of like, well, we want to do these projects and implement this technology. And I'm, you know, and always bringing them back and saying, well, why? What value does that bring? Does that really reflect where the university wants to go? Have we listened to the colleges? Have we listened to the university of what they want and where we can support that? And really reflecting in our technology plan, not what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it, how we're going to partner, how we're going to look at the goals and that of the university and then align to those. And so from an internal perspective, it was very difficult, but I felt I brought some strength to that, to just, you know, ask the stupid questions, because I always say I'm the least technical person in our organization, but I could understand enough from the business side to mirror it up. And then also that culture shift from the external side. So what the university was used to sort of seeing technology is as a utility, and that we were there to keep the internet going and to put desktops on in their offices and that kind of stuff, but not to, you know, how do we enable the research? How do we enhance the student experience? How do we, you know, enable the creative learning that needs to happen on our campuses as we move forward? And so when I started having those conversations, people, you know, they started to first kind of, well, you're IT, you're not supposed to be talking about this stuff. But it's been, you know, I think we put our plan in place the spring of 2019, and my governance committees, the conversations we have there are so different from where they started, you know, and they're bringing stuff to me now to say, like, how can we do this? And how can we help with this? And we're really looking at this, like, how can you guys help us with this? And before they wouldn't have even come to us. They wouldn't have thought that was our role. And so, you know, I know your question was, you know, the journey that I've had with the CIO, but you know, I sort of leveraged the strengths that I thought I could bring to this, and really trying to set it up kind of for that next CIO to really be able to springboard off of that as well into the whatever shifts that they want to do as they move forward.
Yeah, so there's an interesting thing that you've just said that I'm going to just tap into, which I think is kind of interesting. Because I've had this thinking and have talked to some of my, you know, what I refer to as my board of directors, some of my people who I mentor, or who mentor me really, but who I reach out to when I want to ask questions about that idea of how are we creating something for the next CIO? And it's an interesting thing. And I'm wondering, is that a unique perspective? You just said it. I know I've felt that way. And I think there's always sort of the sense that at some point you're going to time out, either, you know, the joke is if you implement an ERP, you're going to have to go anyway. So you better, you know, so either really get into it and do it and then get out, or don't go there. But all joking aside, just this idea of developing forward. So let's talk about that for a minute. Is that something that you've always thought about as a leader? How do I prepare for my my succession plan, and how the next person might step into this, and what I'm going to be able to give them as a step in the right direction, or at least a lift up? Tell me a little bit about your thinking.
I think we didn't really start thinking in that sense until higher ed. And I think how that sort of came about was just the longevity of higher ed and how it does evolve, and even like the org structures, the culture, everything that we've been undertaking over these past few years. I've kind of seen kind of a little bit of a, you know, back and forth and moving it forward. And so really trying to focus and seeing, you know, the Titanic aspect of it, of the slowness of how to make the change as well, but really just trying to show, or, you know, we're never going to get to perfection. There's never going to be a done, but how do we get better? And how do we do things, you know, more effectively or in a way that's more sustainable for the future? Because we're dealing with a lot of anchors and things that are holding us back. If we can kind of get through those and make us more agile, more responsive, so that now we can really sort of leapfrog into that innovation agenda that the university. So I think it's the, you know, it is the unique to higher ed as well, because I think it's the longevity of things that are happening and moving forward, but also the slowness that happens with it sort of balances the two together.
That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's something worth contemplating and spending a bit more time talking about. So I'm going to chase you up on that in other forums, because I do think it is really interesting. And it's not often something that you hear people talking about. It's, in a sense, it's a bit of a legacy piece where you're thinking, you know, if I can make some change and it can be enduring, what would those things be? And it's never really, it's not the technology, because we know that's going to change all the time. It truly is what you've talked about: culture, it's perception, it's capability, and you know, being able to open up some space around innovation and so forth. So thank you for that. I think that's really interesting. Maybe along a similar vein, or not, but I'm going to bring this up in that as a bit of a riff off of that, is this idea of women in IT. Mm-hmm. So as female leaders, and we've had these conversations, yes, at the panel at Can Height, but you and I have talked about this, and I think we've talked about this amongst our peers, male and female. We know that women or diversity in gender is not as prevalent. I think there's certainly research more broadly, not necessarily in higher education, but in our own environments as well. And so we're seeing a shift. I know when I started back in the 90s as well, Shari, you know, I was the first system analyst, I think, that was hired into my environment. And I had, you know, I had no idea what I was doing. There are a lot of people wondering, who are you and what are you doing? But you talked a little bit about your population there and the diversity within your team. Can you talk about that a little bit, and how do you've got some interesting things you've been achieving and working towards to try and address this diversity piece? So can you speak to that for us a little bit?
Yeah, and I would say I've really tried to sort of focus on this a lot more over probably about these last 3 or 4 years. You know, as we're doing the culture shift, you know, and I'm looking around even at some of the teams that we're working with as we're trying to move ahead in this. You know, I noticed, you know, lots of teams that were men only, not a lot of Indigenous people within ICT. So started really looking at why and digging into some of that. And I noticed in our recruitment processes, you know, there was a lot of things that had been put in place, like I'm going to say 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, things that really probably didn't make sense anymore, and I think was limiting us. And so we only have about 20% women in our IT organization, and probably less than 2% Indigenous people in our ICT organization. And so, you know, just on the job posting, I'll just do that. Like, so our job posting was very, you know, upfront, like, you need all of these mandatories. You have to have a computer science degree. You have to have this many years of experience. You have to have all of these coding skills and all that kind of stuff. And so I started using myself as a you know, example to some of our hiring managers. And I said, well, if this posting came about and I applied for it, I wouldn't get it because I don't have a computer science degree. I don't have those coding skills. You know, I don't have, you know, this stuff, but would you hire me as this? And they were like, well, yeah, of course, you know. And so I'm like, well, why do we have those things in our posting when they don't really reflect? And I think that was, you know, limiting our pool. And they always say, like, women will look at a posting, and if they have 100% of the qualifications, they'll apply. But if they don't have 100%, they're not going to apply. So we've been really working a lot on that to, one, make our postings less sort of the mandatory type of stuff and more just what is the real thing, and looking for that open mindset, willingness to learn, creativity, relationship building, you know, that kind of aspect to it. And also making our postings a lot more, I'm going to say fun, but, exciting, right? Instead of, we're the university and, come work with us, it was more like we have some of the most creative minds, in the world. And this is all the amazing stuff that's happening here, just to try to gauge and get increased excitement to actually even apply. Looking at where we're posting, we always put it just on our website, well, okay, well, there's a lot of social media out there now. Like, is there ways that we can maybe get out to people a little bit better? So, and really, even just once we get sort of candidates, then our interview panel was sort of all white men. So you come into an interview and you're like, okay, is this representative of what I'm coming into? So again, just really revamping that whole recruitment process. Had some pretty good successes over the last, I'd say, year. So we're still sort of in the building part of it, but I think we're getting there. And now I'm starting to focus a lot on, once we have some of these amazing women that have joined us, how do we sort of keep them sort of engaged and in sort of that thing, in supportive environment and that. And so I've started a Women in IT group that I host monthly, and we have some fun events, or sometimes we have speakers come in and do different things. I reach out and meet with each of the new hires with women and just sort of make sure they feel that they can come to me. And I've got sort of my director team kind of all focused on that. And how do we, instead of making the women change to fit into the teams that they're coming into, how do we get the teams to be more supportive and embracing of what's the culture and everything that we want it to become? So really focusing a lot on that as well too. But it's a work in progress, and it's taking a lot of time, but I think it's going to pay off. And I think having that more diverse employee base and people at the table, I think just helps us. It helps because our campus is approximately 50-50 of men, women. We have about 25% Indigenous students and stuff. So we need to get reflective of what our campus looks like within our own organization.
Good for you. That's a lot of really dedicated and focused work. And it does take a lot when you're a department within a larger department within, an organization, to make changes like that happen. Not because people aren't, I don't believe there's any lack of interest in making the change, but it's the process to get it there, and having people dedicated and looking at it. And in some cases, because of the way we do our valuations, it can take a bit of time to move things through. So congratulations to you. And I think it's interesting to all of the things you've talked about absolutely could be beneficial to others in our space as well. So thank you for doing that. And with that, so as you see a shift and try to help support a shift towards a bit more diversity, I'm curious for you whether you think there'll be some differences in terms, and I know we talked about this at CanHide as well, Shari, just that issue of are there differences culturally or otherwise for women juggling in the work environment, expectations around technology positions in some cases that can be outside of standard business hours. There may be requirements on weekends and things like that. So as you shift some of your focus to a more diverse environment, that means more diverse needs, more diverse approaches. So any thoughts about that? And have you seen some challenges? I know going through COVID has given us all a bit of a different lens, and certainly we're trying to be very compassionate and understanding of how people have their whole lives that they bring into the workplace and the challenge around that. So curious for you what you think of that and any things that you've been seeing or thinking about in that space.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you said, COVID really brought this out a lot too. And even in the news, you were hearing how women were exponentially disadvantaged by some of the remote and hybrid work arrangements, because it was typically, I guess, research that had, I don't have anything that I can cite right in front of me, but that they were the ones that were caring more for their families and the schooling of their kids and all that. So, but I think in a way that was good. And I was glad that we had some recent new hires, and even some already getting some of the women in IT sort of focused on, because we did talk about this as well. And I think having those voices of those women to come back into our organization really helped us make sure that we were, putting in place the supports and what needed to happen as we moved forward. And I think moving into now, whatever, I don't want to say post-COVID, because I don't think we're
none
not
of us know what
yet.
to say, Shari. Yeah, what is this time?
Yeah, in this transition time of whatever, we're looking at all the hybrid arrangements that we have and really trying to figure out what that might mean for our teams, and having more voices at the table to balance kind of that, I think is healthy and is I'm glad that we have that there, because obviously people who don't have those experiences, it's hard for them to bring that perspective when you're trying to look at those services. So, and I go back to, when I first was asked to be the CIO, and it was kind of funny, and I always reflect on this a little bit, but one of the first, before I accepted or anything, and like I said, I was in the Czech Republic, so I was trying to make these phone calls or whatever, I reached out to my husband, because at the time, my husband had multiple jobs. I was director and had certain things. And I said, this is going to change our family dynamics. You're going to have to pick up a lot more in the ways of helping with the family, because this is going to be a larger role for me. And CIOs aren't 9-to-5 positions. And, I needed to get, are you okay with this? Because it's going to change our family dynamic. I don't know if he would have done the same thing, back if he had, got this kind of, he would have probably just accepted it and it would have been fine. But I find women kind of have that extra sense of, okay, this is going to change sort of for our family. This is a family decision and not just, and is that right or wrong? It's just the way it was at that time. And I think it's still in a lot of cases is the way is. So we need to be cognizant of that as well as we move forward. So I do think there's that added pressure for women, especially with families and that and they take on a lot more of that responsibility and ownership. So we just have to be mindful of those extra pressures and things that are added to their plate.
Yeah. And I know I've had those conversations with some of my employees who are balancing elder care, even if the kids are gone or what have you. And it's interesting, in the current news today and yesterday, the cabinet shuffle in the federal government, because an individual who's female came forward to say she needed a little bit of a lighter load in order to manage some family related issues. And it's really interesting, because I was thinking as I was driving in, I wonder if, first of all, would that have been even mentioned as part of the cabinet shuffle if it wasn't a woman? And maybe that's not really fair, but the fact that that was openly shared, I think is good to say, hey, we all need to recognize that there's balance. People have full lives. There's other things going on, and to be aware of that and be able to make change to help to support people through those times. But it is an interesting time of, I wonder how that might have been handled in the news differently if it was a different individual, and how that became sort of public knowledge. Why does that matter if that's the reason behind it? So anyway, all those things that we think about in the world around us, of course. So, and I do think, that compassion and empathy and leadership stems from personal growth. We all have gone through a lot of things. So I know that you and I have talked about this a little bit, Shari, that you would be willing to talk about some of your own personal growth. And just so you know, and everybody who knows me who's listening, I'm an empathetic person in many ways. I'll laugh really loudly with you, and I get teary-eyed over things. Sometimes I get teary-eyed over nothing, but mostly but I do want to say you have I think very courageously shared with us being your peers, some of the really challenging things that you've gone through, and you're channeling that very much. I think it mirrors really well the experience that you've had coming through IT from a different realm, and then really thinking about how do we bring other people in, because there is an opportunity for success here. When you think about this from a personal growth perspective, you have a personal story that I know that you're willing to share, but really I want to allow you that opportunity, but also ask you to really focus on how are you leveraging that experience to ensure that you can take it forward and leave a legacy as well. So if you don't mind, you had a loss in your family, and so if you'll share that, but let's talk, really about how we support people coming out of similar situations.
Yeah. So yeah, I lost my son I told Gayleen I was going to do this, so hopefully I can keep it together. But in May of 2020, he was a university student here at USask, but he had struggled with mental health. He was diagnosed with ADHD, had extreme social anxiety, and then closer to the end was depression. And so committed suicide in May of 2020. And so the struggles that, our family had, all through his life of trying to deal with that mental illness and just trying to make his life as successful as could be in a society that didn't allow us to talk about it much, didn't allow for a lot of supports. There was really no supports available to him at that time in the school system, even in healthcare, not a lot of supports. And I said this to Gayleen, was that I know he's looking down on me now and going, Mom, shut up, because he didn't want me to talk about things, but I feel that I have to. I feel that it is such a prevalent issue in our society right now, and I think it came more to light over COVID, and I think there's going to be lots of challenges ahead of us with how we support people that are going through mental health issues, whether it's an illness or if it's just sort of a situational aspect to their life. But I've been really, I've reached out to a lot of the organizations and units on campus here because we experienced sort of barriers on campus to getting supports, even for Matthew at that time. And so we've made lots of changes in our student support area. I think, we've made changes in he was a football player, so in the Husky Athletics, they now have a mental health practitioner right with them. They do a lot of discussion and talks about it.
Right.
Yeah, I've been really working a lot with some of the youth sports organizations here in Saskatoon, just to bring that awareness and make it more normal, make it more normal for kids to just talk about what they're feeling and how they're doing and what they're experiencing at any point in time, and that they don't have to hide these things. They don't have to feel ashamed. They don't have to be made to feel ashamed, because I think society as a whole is more receptive to some of that talk. I think some sports organizations need a lot of work, but from the culture perspective, but they're at least seeing it more in the news and stuff. And so how I'm bringing that to even my organization, to ICT, I've told my director group, I said to them, I'm not the same person I was previous to May 2020. A loss like that just
changes everything, doesn't it?
Changes your whole perspective, everything.
Yeah.
And it, in some ways, and this is going to sound a little bit crass, but it almost makes you not care about some things, right? It comes crystal clear, crystal focus of what really matters, what matters. And family and your personal health, that is what matters. And people need to start realizing that that's what they need to focus on. That's what they need to look out for. Work and job, yes, you want to make sure that, you're accomplishing and you're feeling accomplished, because that will help with your mental health and all that kind of stuff. But the focus needs to be on that, not the job at the expense of your personal and your family health. And so, I think I even mentioned this, what I would say to my younger self or whatever, because I would get so tied up in knots. I do have anxiety and that I had quite a bit before. The little things that I fretted over really it doesn't matter anymore. And so how do we support our employees and the people that we work with, and that to make sure that they're either given the time they need to do what they need to do for their family and themselves, because that only really reinforces sort of the productivity and the creativity that they will bring to work. And so they both actually support each other if we do it well and do it right.
Yes, so you've shared so much. So first, I just want to say thank you, because it does take courage to be vulnerable and to share, you know, hard stories like that. So, and of course, you know, I know that people who are listening in will really feel for you, and my sympathies, and we have these conversations over time, obviously. But you know, the other thing that I think is so important in what you've said is these are really life-altering circumstances and impact, and our work environments are set up, we're shifting in that direction, but they're really not set up to, in a lot of, let's say, more standard situations, to really understand the impact of that. And so even, you know, the loss and your new perspective notwithstanding, going back and really thinking about some of the challenges that you must have dealt with as a working parent who had challenging situations that you're trying to support family members through, while having these high expectations of self, and the workplace having high expectation of you. You know, we really are, it is a very different time. And so thinking about that, and I love what you've said, you know, really, what would you tell your younger self? And how do we encourage people to really think about that a little bit differently, setting up organizations so that we still have a high level of need for productivity? I think we'd be you know, disingenuous to say that wasn't the case, and prioritizing and ensuring that, you know, highly productive individuals, it doesn't mean it has to come at the expense of personal health or family and personal well-being either. So I don't know what kind of conversations you have. I know you have that, you said, with your directors, you've talked about that a little bit. How do we inculcate our cultures around that kind of thinking, especially in IT, which is a 24/7 expectation in many cases?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've been able to share, and I've shared a lot of my experience with my directors, with my managers as well. And really trying to model the way to say, it's okay for me to show vulnerability. It's okay for me to ask for help. It's okay for me to say, you know what, I'm not having a good day. It's just things are happening, and I can't really concentrate and focus, and I need to step away. I'm trying to be as visible as possible in doing that and saying that, to hopefully make it more sort of acceptable for others. Really trying to talk with, you know, managers and their directors on, like, there's a lot of busy work we do, and do we need to continue with that busy work? Is there ways that we can, you know, make it, you can still get the outcomes and the value proposition that you need with being that less busy work? And so really trying to look for ways and things that, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we have to keep doing it that way. And let's figure out, how do we reduce some of that churn?
Yeah, no, I love that. You're right, because it's always it's another straw in the pile of things that people feel pressure to get done and to do. So I love that. We'll have to talk about, you know, what are some of those things that you found, because I think you know, sometimes you can't even see it because it's been something that's in the environment for so long. So I do want to just ask as well, Shari, because you did talk about this. So today is, if I'm going to get this right, I hope, but International Overdose Awareness Day. And you've been involved in supporting communities, groups, and have community engagement around this. Do you want to take an opportunity to just talk a little bit more about that, but also the Suicide Awareness Month in September, which is really fascinating when we think about students who are coming out of their homes for the first time in 2 years and entering into a whole new world on our campuses. I'm sure this is a conversation that many people are having right now. So if you don't mind enlightening us a little bit on those, that'd be amazing, please.
Yeah, so as I said, like, my son's death was considered a suicide because he had been showing signs of the depression and stuff. It was a drug overdose. That was the ultimate factor. But I always, whether it was a suicide or an unintentional, because, you know, I always think of the drug supply issues and stuff like that. So he had been self-medicating for a while, and that was really the lack of supports for his mental illness. And we had been trying to, you know, work with a psychiatrist and get him through it, but that's a whole other conversation, because our medical system is just not geared for that. So whether it was a suicide or an accidental death, it really, to me, it doesn't matter, but it looks at things in a different way. So I do a lot of work with Moms Stop the Harm, and it's a group of mothers or parents that their kids of all ages, of all genre, of all backgrounds have lost their lives to overdose. And it's really trying to lobby the government and make awareness of drug policies in our country. And there's been a lot of really great movement at the municipal level, but we're really trying to get it to the federal level as well, because if you can sort of regulate the drug aspect of it, you know, it's like alcohol. You know, we used to have prohibition with alcohol, but and people died because you didn't know what was happening or what was inside the alcohol. Now, at least it's, you know, when you go to buy, something that it's got that quality assurance. Same with the drug supply, should be very similar to that. And so really trying to get people to think about it in that fashion, to stop the deaths, the overwhelming deaths that are happening in that way. So today is a day of really trying to get that awareness out. So there's purple ribbons. Some people have been painting purple chairs to kind of signify that there's always an empty chair where your loved one should have been and is not anymore. So this is their big day to try to get that awareness. And then with the suicide, yes, so September is Suicide Prevention Month. And so there's a lot of activities and materials that come out from Canadian Mental Health and the provincial mental health and that. And so working a lot with people on that. I'm actually working with a few new teachers that are going out, and they're doing a lot of mental health. They're doing a run for mental health here in Saskatoon with the K-12 area. And so some of the teachers have reached out to me and asked if they can use Matthew's story to kind of raise that awareness. And I've, obviously given them my blessing and materials that I've had in the past, but really, again, just trying to raise awareness of that and getting people to talk and that it's okay to reach out when you're not feeling well and getting these kids and these young adults to realize that it's not, they're not alone. There's a lot of people that can help them, and there's a lot of people going through the same types of things, and how do we connect them and get them more connected? And that's usually the reason for that ultimate into the suicide, is that they feel so isolated, they feel so alone, and there's nothing left for them or nothing left that they can do. So if we can just really find that connection for them. And so that's what we're really trying to focus on here as well.
That's amazing. Thank you, Shari, for sharing that as well. I'm sure you've educated a few people, but also provided people with some direction. And maybe one of the things we can focus on when we do push this video out after the fact is to add in some information that helps to point people to supports and some of the material that you've been discussing. So thank you for that. One of the things that it really highlights for me, outside of the tragic loss and the weight of that as you've carried forward, is the resiliency. We've used that word a ton over the last couple of years, but it takes a lot to be able to continue to put one foot in front of the other after going through loss, and then to continue to succeed and support others and do all of that. So there's a lot of energy expended in being able to do that. So you're an inspiration, and I think you're also setting a wonderful example to people that you work with, and now we'll expand that circle of folks who get to be inspired by you, which I'm really grateful for, because I think you are a real inspiration. I'm curious for you, what is it that you do? So you've got this huge job, and you've really just changed culture in your institution. So congratulations for that. And then you've got this amazing set of activities that you're putting your heart into outside of work as well. which really does reflect just how we are we're 360-degree full, creative, resourceful, whole individuals who come into work and then have a whole life outside of work. And I think it's really important for us to be able to remind people of that as well. But what is it that you do to re-energize yourself? Because I just think, wow, there's some pretty amazing things that you're doing. Some of it is heavy and very heart impactful. So, and that can take a lot of energy. And you just indicated to us that you're more of an introvert as well. So what is it that keeps Shari running like a little Energizer bunny?
Well, probably the two things that I just kind of immerse myself in to just kind of get re-energized is books. Like I love, so I do a lot of like the self improvement books, but I also like, murder mysteries. It takes my mind down a path. It keeps my mind active and busy down a path that's not focused on all the other stuff. And so I read through those quite vigorously. And then we live on an acreage, and so I have a large yard with lots of gardens. So I have a huge vegetable garden and a flower garden. So just love to get out there and get my hands dirty and just, again, mindless kind of activities that I can do that just takes me away from everything else.
Well, they do say we had a wonderful retreat recently for the department, and that whole idea of connecting with Earth was talked about and how important that is for us to feel connections. So maybe mindless, but really mindful to be able to put your hands in dirt. But I was going to say, you've got to be really resilient if you think you're going to grow a wonderful vegetable garden in Saskatoon. I know it's the what is it, Paris of the Prairies, but I've been to Saskatoon a few times, and your summers aren't the longest things, are they?
Oh, we've had pretty good, like it's 34 degrees today, and so yeah, it's so it was a good garden year this year. So
awesome, that's great, wonderful. Well, I think that's a really nice ending, because it is about growth and planting seeds and taking things forward and nurturing things. And clearly, you are a strong and nurturing individual in so many different ways. So thank you, Shari, for sharing your professional journey and your personal journey with me and with our listeners today. It's really been inspiring. And every time I have a conversation with people, I learn something new about them, and I learned a lot about you today. And I really feel grateful that you're willing to share all of that, because I think every time you have a conversation, somebody can find something in it that they can leverage and be able to learn from and grow from. And you've probably helped somebody today, and we don't even know who that is yet. So thank you so much for this. I know we're coming to the end of our time here today, but we will be sharing out this video for everybody and for yourself, Shari. And I wish you every success, and I'm glad that I continue to get to spend time with you in your role as a CIO here in Canadian higher ed IT in the university sector. If you have any final words you'd like to share with us, it's your chance now, and then we'll do a wrap.
No, all I really want to say is thank you, and thank you so much, Gayleen, for coordinating and facilitating this. This has been wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.